Hi, I'm Sagi, and I'm the coordinator for English Medium Instruction here at BGU. In this video, I would like to share with you a few tips on using your voice and speech to facilitate learning in academic courses conducted in English. The challenge facing many students in academic courses taught in English is that English is not their native tongue. This means students have to listen, translate, understand, and take notes all at the same time. This can lead to cognitive overload and prevent students from following the lesson. I would like to suggest three main solutions to the problem of student understanding in English medium instruction courses. The first is clarity, the second is precision, and the third is dynamism. We will explore each one of these solutions in turn. When it comes to clarity, I would like to focus on three main things: tempo, pronunciation, and register. Tempo has to do, in this case, with the speed at which the language is spoken. You do not want to speak too slowly because that is a bit annoying and can get the students to fall asleep. But the problem is often not that speech is too slow, but that it's too fast. Let's take this text as an example. What do you think happens to your students when you say it like this? The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the States General of 1789 and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. It is very difficult to follow even in one's native tongue, not to mention in one's second and sometimes even third language. The proper tempo, therefore, especially in English medium instruction lessons, should be a little slower than the natural speed of speech. It should sound something like this. The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the Estates General of 1789 and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy, while its values and institutions remain central to modern French political discourse. Pronunciation is just as important as tempo when it comes to language comprehension. Students may have trouble as it is understanding some of the words which they do not know or some of the more difficult terms. It becomes ever more difficult if these words and terms are pronounced improperly. What would happen if I say this text like this? The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the States General of 1789 and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy, while its values and institutions remain central to modern French political discourse. It is very difficult to follow, and if students don't know the words, they don't even hear them properly to try to figure these out later. Therefore, make sure to pronounce words properly, especially the important terms or difficult words that students must fully hear to even make sense of. It should sound something like this. The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the Estates General of 1789 and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy, while its values and institutions remain central to modern French political discourse. The last aspect of clarity I would like to discuss is register, the level of the language you use. Even if you speak slowly or a bit slower than usual, and even if you pronounce the words correctly, your students may still not understand many of the words you use. Remember, you may know both your field and English well, but for students, many of the words combined with difficult terms may be incomprehensible, and therefore they will lose track of what is being discussed. Therefore, it's also important that the language used for teaching is a more conversational, simpler language. This doesn't mean that important terms should be omitted or changed into terms that are inappropriate. But apart from the important terms, it may be a good idea to use language that will be more understandable. Look at this example of the previous text with words that have been changed highlighted. The order has also been changed a little to help with comprehension. The French Revolution was a time of great change in France that began in 1789 with a national meeting called the Estates General and ended in November 1799 with the creation of a government called the French Consulate. Many of its ideas and organizations are important to liberal democracy and to modern French politics. Change is not great here, but small changes in order and small changes in the language used can help students follow the difficult words while not losing track in between. With precision, I would like to focus rather on what not to do than on what to do. Here, two things should be avoided: over-explaining and meta-commentary. Explanations are important. After all, we want students to understand some of the difficult things we talk about. And yet there is such a thing as over-explaining, when too many explanations prevent students from paying attention to what's actually important. To show how this works, I'm going to use this text. Here we have behaviorism as the topic. I'm just going to read the text for now. It has sometimes been said that behave is what organisms do. Behaviorism is built on this assumption, and its goal is to promote the scientific study of behavior, the behavior in particular of individual organisms, not of social groups, not of cultures, but of persons and animals. In terms of clarity, this is a pretty straightforward text, but if over-explained, it could turn into something much less understandable. Let's see what happens to the same text when we add more explanations than necessary to it. The additional explanations are marked as bold. It has sometimes been said, well, some people say it, especially scientists working in the field, that behave is what organisms do. I mean humans, animals, birds, rats, maybe other life forms with developed brains. Behaviorism is built on this assumption, and its goal is to promote the scientific study of behavior. Not just any study, but the kind done in a controlled environment many times, with close observation, like we do in labs. The behavior in particular of individual organisms, not of social groups, not of cultures, but of person and animals. We don't want to know how many people behave together or packs in the wild. These are not individual, but it belongs to other types of study like sociology or anthropology. Notice that the additional explanations don't actually explain anything. All they do is make this text longer, less clear, and more broken up. It's more important to keep your text clear and precise than to add too many explanations at the expense of both clarity and precision. In addition to over-explaining, another thing to avoid is meta-commentary. That is, commentary on our own speech. Not on the content, but on our own speech. This is not only redundant, but it also doesn't explain anything and add to the confusion for those who do not fully comprehend the language. Here in bold letters we have additions that are a type of meta-commentary, such as we sometimes tell ourselves while we speak, but that should we be careful with when using a language that is less comprehensible for students. I want to start by saying that it has sometimes been said, and I say it as well, that behave is what organisms do. Behaviorism is built on this assumption, and the goal is to promote the scientific study of behavior. Now that we know what other people say, let's make it even more specific that we are talking here about the behavior in particular of individual organisms, not of social groups, not of cultures, but how should I make it clear? Yes, not all of these, but of persons and animals. Notice again that besides being unhelpful, these comments are confusing and may lead students away from what's central. With clarity and precision, my focus was on the language itself, how to make it more understandable or how to make it more focused. But language in itself is not enough. We need to add dynamism to our language. We need to make the language alive. We need to make it interesting. We need to make it effective and affective. In this case, we're going to talk about three aspects of dynamism that are especially important and useful: volume, emotion, and pauses. Volume has to do with how loudly or how quietly we speak. It is a good way to signal to students which terms and ideas they should pay attention to, or when they should pay attention a little more. Let's look at the next text from thermodynamics and see how adding just a little bit of volume in specific places can help emphasize what this paragraph is about. Thermodynamics is a branch of science that deals with heat and energy. It helps us understand how energy moves and changes in different systems like engines, refrigerators, and even our own bodies. It studies things like heat transfer, work, and the relationships between different forms of energies. In simple terms, it's all about understanding how heat and energy work and how they affect the world around us. I know it sounds a bit strange, but these little raises in volume can really help your students know when it's time to listen again, and even give them a little nudge in case they decided to look elsewhere while you're speaking. To make our speech more engaging and more understandable, it's not enough to add volume. As we've seen, simply adding volume may make us sound a bit strange. This way we also need to add emotion to our speech. Emotions can vary through the entire spectrum of joy, sadness, surprise, excitement, whatever fits the situation. But combined with volume, it produces a very interesting effect. In the following paragraph, we have both the raises in volume marked in bold letters, and underlined, we have places where emotion can be infused even further. Thermodynamics is a branch of science that deals with heat and energy. It helps us understand how energy moves and changes in different systems like engines, refrigerators, and even our own bodies. It studies things like heat transfer, work, the relationship between different forms of energy. In simple terms, it's all about understanding how heat and energy work and how they affect the world around us. Again, this is just a small example, and the emotion here, let's face it, is not too excessive. But adding just a little bit of emotion here and there to your words can again prompt students to notice what's important and what's less important, as well as again nudge them into listening to you in key moments. Last but not least, we have tactical pauses. Pauses are simply places where we stop for a second and then continue. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, stopping and saying nothing actually says much, and says much about what comes next. Let's look at this text again, this time both with raises in volume, in bold letters, and additions of emotion with the underlined, and the ellipses mark places where we should take little pauses to make this even more effective. Thermodynamics is a branch of science that deals with heat and energy. It helps us understand how energy moves and changes in different systems like engines, refrigerators, even our own bodies. It studies things like heat transfer, work, and the relationships between different forms of energy. In simple terms, it's all about understanding how heat and energy work and how they affect the world around us. As I hope you can see, these little pauses add a lot to this text. It not only emphasizes the words that come before and after the pauses, but it also produces a slightly more dramatic effect in addition to the emotions we infuse into it and the slight raises in volume that we produce in order to draw students' attention. In conclusion, students less adept at English may have trouble listening, translating, understanding, and taking notes all at the same time. But there's something you, the instructors, can do to help with that. By speaking in the appropriate speed and language, so that students may understand the words. By focusing on what matters, so that what they do make an effort listening to and understanding is actually what important for the course material, and by adding color and emphasis to your voice, adding emotion, raising volume when necessary, pausing in tactical places. All of these, of course, will not suddenly make your students know English better, but it can help them understand you better. It can help them focus on what's important, and it can help them stay in tune with your speech and with your lesson, even if they feel a little daunted by the fact that many of the words or some of the words are less understandable to them than they would have been in their own language. Thank you for watching and listening. If you have further questions or would like additional guidance, contact us or visit the BGU Teaching Center website.